Okay, so welcome to All the Way Podcasts, episode 4. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about being self aware. The one thing I want you to get from this episode is it takes courage to be who you really are. So let's get started. It is a very liberating feeling, especially in a world where you can get lost in who you are, or especially if you are somebody who doesn't know who you are. I want you to take the time to date and to get to know yourself. It doesn't matter if you're with somebody or you're not. I want you to take the time to get to know yourself, get to know your limits, understand where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. Even if you already have an understanding of what those are, I want you to take the time to really delve into what that can really be. I want you to take certain tests to understand who you really are inside and out. Anything from personality profiling to little online quizzes and stuff like that, just to find out what your little personality is. Don't feel like you should be put in a box by people closest to you, and I'm going to talk about in this episode what can happen when even people who love you try and put their views of who you should be on you, and how that can affect you negatively, and what the kind of books you should look at, and the information that's out there, and how the internet, which is probably the bulk of what's going to be spoken about today, how the internet can really manipulate you, especially if you don't know who you really are. This is still a positive podcast, but I'm just going to give you some things to look out for, which is really good. So let's get started. The first thing I wanted to go into was a quote from George Foreman. And George Foreman is, professional boxer, and he made a quote on Muhammad Ali, and it's a Netflix documentary called I Am Ali, and it says he said that it's almost an insult to call Muhammad Ali a boxer, because he was so much more than that. And I've paraphrased the quote, but it was just absolutely beautiful. And Muhammad Ali was renowned for his boxing, but who he was completely different. He even said that if he wasn't a boxer, he'd be doing something working with people, where he would help liberate black people, especially at the time that he was coming up. He used to see black people of the poorest end of the scale, and he said he wanted to do things to help them. And I just thought that was so beautiful. But he used boxing as a platform in order to be able to do that. Now, if you took away his boxing, he'd still be who he is, but you just wouldn't know his name as much. He'd just be still in Louisville, Kentucky. So the point is with that is, when you know who you are, it doesn't matter which arena you go into, as long as you stay true to who you are. And when you do, then it works a lot nicer. I just before I was recording this, I had a look at a quote, a short clip from Will Smith, and him and Martin Lawrence were promoting Bad Boys for Life, and they do an interview on The Breakfast Club, and Will Smith explains that his character that people see on TV is something that he tried to carry with him everywhere he goes, which is quite tough to do every day, especially when you're in the public eye and he's such a huge star. But he said that being a particular character got him into certain places and it worked for him. But also, while he was in that limelight, it didn't work for him in certain areas as well. And then you see that you have a choice, whether you are, especially when it's not working, you have a choice to carry on being this character, or to try and really be authentically you to your core, so that the whole world can accept you, and be brave enough to let the world accept you for who you are. And when you look at, if you type in Breakfast Club on YouTube and Will Smith, Martin Lawrence, it's about 15 minutes in, and he really explains it. And I think it's a fantastic way of showing how sometimes you can put on this character and it works for you, but also putting on this character can stop working, and you have a choice whether you're going to carry on doing it that way or you're going to be authentically yourself. And he said in his 50th birthday, he decided, you know what, I'm going to be authentically me. And, you know, you can look on his Instagram, any post that he did from his 50th birthday onwards, you can just see how the world just loves him even more. And it's just a fantastic way of being able to look at it. So the reason why I wanted to make this podcast is this is just for anybody who doesn't really know who they are, or, you know, has no idea where to even start. And I just want to go into a little bit about my experiences as well, and some of the things you can kind of look out for, and just be aware of. And I just want you to get to know your limits as well as a human being. We all have limits, we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. But when you understand them, you can better navigate this wonderful thing called life much better when you understand that. And I'll give you an example of my job, for example. My dad told me when I was, you know, leaving school, you know, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. He said, go into accounting because you're good at maths. I said, okay. And then, you know, a few years in, similar to what Will Smith was saying, sometimes it was working for you, sometimes it's not. And ultimately, I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that this is not me. I'm doing it, and some days are great, some days aren't, but I feel like there's more to me than this. And I had the bottle to make the leap to try and find out what that really is. And now long story short, I'm in a career and a job and a role that I absolutely love, and I can see myself doing it for the rest of my life. But I had to be brave to make the challenge, to make the challenge to myself, to make the transition and say, I don't think this is me doing accounting, and I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. But there must be something out there that I can see myself doing for the rest of my life. And it took a process of understanding who I am as an individual to be able to find out what that is. And, you know, it took a few years, but I found it. And the beautiful part is, I'm in my 20s and did that. Some people don't find that until they're very late on in life. And good on them for doing it. But, you know, I just want to encourage people to find it out as early on as possible. That's why I'm making this podcast. So you need to learn to listen to yourself, you know, get to know what this gut feeling is inside of you. When you do that, that's kind of a really good indicator of what's for you and what's not. You know, they say, you know, the gut is such a good way of being able to talk to you. And when you understand it, and when you listen to it, that's the main thing. Have the bravery in the bottle to listen to it. Then it goes a lot further than you can realise. Now, this internet, this wonderful thing called the internet, it's arguably the best man-made creation and the worst man-made creation in history. But the internet is such a powerful tool which has wild loads of information out there. But unfortunately, sometimes with that information that's out there, especially if you don't know who you are, you can get lost in all that information that's out there, and you can almost lose who you are trying to match what the internet is trying to tell you should be. Now, my call to you, if you're going to do anything with this podcast, the action that I want you to take is take the time to get to know you, but use the internet to help amplify who you really are. Now, some people hop on a trend that looks good on the internet and tries to incorporate that into who they are, which is wrong. It should be the other way around. I deliver who I am and I put it on the internet. And obviously, everybody has a particular social media account. Everybody has ways of being able to communicate with people across the world. That's just the norm now. But if you get lost in what's popping and what's popular and what's culturally good and what's all this kind of stuff, then you can get lost in who you are, and you can take on an image and it might actually work for you. That's the mad thing. it could actually work for you doing something that's not you, but because it gets lots of likes, because it gets lots of retweets and brings you lots of followers and gets you a big following, you carry on doing it. And then you get to a stage where, is this really me? But what I'm trying to say to you from the get-go, you need to use the internet as a tool to amplify who you already are. And so the best way I can really convey this, to show you how powerful this can be, is in a book called Good to Great. And this book called Good to Great is the study in the 1980s of big organizations who are good and those that go from good all the way to being great and massive and successful, and some of them are even existing till this day. And it studies why some companies make that jump and why some companies actually start good but dip. And one of the chapters is called Technology Accelerators. And it's chapter 7 in this book, Good to Great, by Jim Collins. I'd recommend it to anybody. Fantastic book. But in this book, it gives an example in this chapter of Walgreens and a internet drugstore. And what happens is people were, in the 1980s trying to build an organization, but there's this rumors of this internet that's coming. There's this rumors of this internet that's going to revolutionize how we do business. And, later on down the line, here we are in 2020, we realize that, yes, that is very true. Internet businesses are, exploding and continuing to do so. But in the 1980s and early 1990s, this internet was a brand new tool, and it's going to revolutionize how we do things. And some businesses, just because they said they were on the internet, became, huge on the stock market, and their prices went up incredibly. The problem is they decided to change who they were to match the internet, and they decided to set up their corporations and decided to take their vision in a completely different direction just to match the internet. Those businesses are the ones that went down incredibly quickly, and within a year, they've probably either gone bust or bankrupt. And the reason why I mentioned a company called Walgreens is because I just wanted to share with you a quick excerpt from that book. And it goes like this: we are a crawl, walk, run company. And this is a guy called Dan Jaunt, who told Forbes, describing his deliberate, methodical approach to the internet. Instead of reacting like Chicken Little, Walgreens executives did something quite unusual for the times. They decided to pause and reflect, and decided to use their brains, and decided to think. So they decided to take a pause to understand how they can use the internet to be able to amplify what they are already about. They're not going to change who they are. They just use the internet as a tool to amplify who they really are, because they are aware of who they are. And if they get lost in this internet, they can lose. They lose. And long story short, Walgreens, used the internet, and now they incorporate the internet in their everyday business, but they did it without losing sense of who they really are. But they took time to reflect. They took time to come away. They didn't fall for the pressure of the internet. They used the internet to make them better at who they are. And all the other companies around them who were in their competition, who went on the internet early on and hit the ground running like a bubble, they just burst. And they are no longer available, and they're no longer around. Whereas Walgreens, I'm sure they did a deal with Boots about 6 years ago, so they're still going strong. And over here in the UK, they're going strong as well. So that's just one example of how you use the internet to match your image, rather than change your image to match the internet. And I'm reading a book at the moment called Why Should Anybody Be Led By You? So Jim Collins' Good to Great is a fantastic book, especially chapter 7, where it really talks about technology accelerators. But at the moment, I'm reading a book called Why Should Anybody Be Used By You? And the crux of the beginning of the book, or part of the book, is talking about leaders who are authentically themselves. They are the best leaders. They don't change to who other people are to try and match their style. They do them the best they can. And they're the ones who generally have an upward curve to really go on to being great. And yeah, that's a really good one to understand as well. So when you understand who you are and you use the internet in your favour, that's when it really works. But now I want to talk about the reflective side of actually coming away from the internet or coming away from everything just to get to know you. And there's different ways you can do that. There's personality profilings. I like to use something called Thomas International, fantastic tool in order to be able to get to know you. But I use it for work because any manager that comes into my organisation, we use Thomas International and they're a really good tool for us to help us to get to know our managers better. Now, I've used all these tools and it helps me to understand me. And it's quite a scary process because when the results come back, they're quite scarily accurate. And when you have a document in front of you that exposes your strengths, but also exposes your weaknesses, it can be quite, vulnerable. You're thinking, oh my word, like this is me. This is actually me. But the point is, what you're taught and the real benefit of understanding your strengths and weaknesses is that you can go away and yes, work on those strengths, but also to look at which weaknesses are worth investing time in to understand. Now, everybody has strengths, everybody has weaknesses, but it's how you use those strengths and weaknesses that can really make it work for you in your everyday life. Understanding what your limits are. I can do this and I can't do that. Understanding that is such a liberating experience. I don't have to be perfect at everything. And if you're a leader or if you're a manager in an organisation and you have a good sense of who you are, you have the ability to be able to bring the right people into your team to amplify the areas or to complement the areas that you aren't so good at. So if you're starting a business as well, you need to get people in your team who are good at the things that you're not, so that you're not competing with people rather than you just building the vision that you've set out. And some people fall down because they get people who are good at what they do, and then it's a competition, and then that's when you can get conflict. So you need to understand that when you use these tools and take the time to reflect on who you are, get an understanding of what you're about and what you're not about, it's a very liberating experience. And I've took the time to do that. And now I'm very comfortable understanding that, yes, I have my weaknesses and areas, but it's just being aware of them. So you can put yourself in situations where you're not exposed to those weaknesses, and you can put yourself in situations where you're exposed to your strengths. There's a quote that I read from Warren Buffett. He says, I'm no genius, and he describes his friend who has a quote that he lives by. So Warren Buffett has a friend that he lives by this quote from him. And he says, I'm no genius, but I'm a genius in spots, and I stay around those spots. And I just think that sums it up perfectly. He's no genius, but he's a genius in spots, and I stay around those spots. I stay around the areas that I'm good at. And that's all we're here to do. And, everybody's here for a purpose. Everybody's here for a reason. So I'm not going to get into an area where I'm potentially weak, just to try and prove to myself that I can overcome this weakness, when really I should have been in the areas of my strengths. And for me, one of the most powerful influencers and people that I look up to is Oprah Winfrey. Fantastic example of somebody who can go from, poverty to success in one lifetime. And she did a Harvard Business School interview, and again, this one's on YouTube as well. And it's an hour-long interview, Q&A session. And one of the questions that I really wanted to highlight is right at the very end. And it's just the perfect way that she answered this. It really made me respect her. One of the questions was, is there anything left that you're scared to try? Is there anything left you're scared to try? And she pauses a minute and she says, no. There's nothing left I'm scared to try. But I stay in my lane. To me, that's what makes her her. Because she said, no, there's nothing I'm really scared to try, but I stay in my lane. She's took the time to understand who she is and what she isn't. She could go away and make music, and I'm sure she could get a lot, a number one album, or just purely based on her following alone. But that's not her area. And in another interview, she even said, I wouldn't do music because, she's not been blessed with that ability. But she does know what her ability is, and that's the main thing. So when you are self-aware, when you understand what you've got, when you understand what's in your power and what's not, it's a very liberating experience. And, I've taken the time to get to know me, and I want people out there who, especially ones who have gone through stages of being unsure of who you are. I've been there as well. And the way that I did it is I took time off social media, because social media, even though it does make me laugh and it's a fantastic tool to be able to connect and keep up with your friends and stuff like that, I started to find myself comparing myself to other people. And when you do that, that can be quite a dangerous game, especially if you don't know who you are. So I took the time to come off social media for a few years. And then once I got to know who I am, then I can go back and actually be me authentically. I don't post every day, but what I post is me, and you're getting me. Whereas I know some people who post all the time and they're just posting this kind of fake image. And I see, celebrities do this all the time. They post particular images because they know it can manipulate people in particular ways. But I just know that it's similar to the company I was talking about earlier, whose bubble burst. That's exactly what will happen. And this is why people end up comparing themselves and trying to manipulate themselves to match what they see on the internet instead of actually getting to know who you are. Take the time to get to know who you are is the crux of this podcast. And that's it. So once you get to know who you are, find out who you are, let me know in the comments about who you are, and if this has helped. And in the future, I'd love to be able to connect with you, talk to me, message me, and we can go from there. But the point is, get to know who you are and use the internet as a tool to amplify who you are rather than change your message to match the internet.